Welcome to A Kid's Life podcast. I'm Angela Lockwood, and for the last 20 years, I have been working in schools, supporting teachers to build inclusive classrooms. Through A Kid's Life podcast, my goal is to help us adults better understand the complexities of life as a kid. My guests and I share stories, reflections, and simple strategies to support kids of all needs as they walk through life. So whether you're looking for inspiration, direction, guidance, tips, or just a laugh, A Kid's Life podcast is the place for you. Enjoy. Welcome to A Kid's Life podcast. Thank you for joining me. I'm Angela Lockwood, and this episode today is about something that is really close to my heart because it's something that I have struggled with for quite a while myself, and that is how do we reduce overwhelm in our lives, particularly in the lives of kids. Now, it was something that through my work, working directly with children, that I noticed that there were so many kids, even as young as 5, that were exhibiting, I guess, the fallout of feeling constantly overwhelmed. And it just intrigued me that how did we get to a space where little tiny kids and kids that are a little bit older were feeling overwhelmed. And I couldn't remember feeling like this myself when I was a little one. So I thought I really became fascinated by what are the factors that are contributing to kids feeling like they're overwhelmed. And it intrigued me so much that I started to do some research in it, and it led to me writing a book called Switch Off: How to Find Calm in a Noisy World. And it was through the research of this book, I'd love to say it was all for professional development and to put my professional knowledge in place, but it actually helped me very personally as well. Now, I have a very busy brain, and I knew that my busy brain at times made me feel exhausted. Sometimes my busy brain resulted in me feeling extremely overwhelmed, quite stressed, and sometimes my behaviour when I was in that state of overwhelm wasn't very good to myself or to other people around me. Now, it wasn't that I lashed out or I did anything too crazy, but I know that when I hit overwhelm, there was a few things that I would do that would lead me to either withdrawing and needing to sort of retreat into my own space. But I also knew that sometimes I became so, I would like to say, hyperactive that I wasn't able to concentrate and focus. And interestingly, when I started to do some research into overwhelm in kids, I learned so much about myself in this as well, as much as what I was learning about how kids really face overwhelm. Now, when we look at it, when you think about overwhelm, the meaning of the word is to have a strong emotional effect on. So when you think about it, when people are in a state of overwhelm, then they're going to have a very strong emotional response to that overwhelm. And through my work with kids, particularly in schools, what I was seeing was that teachers were thinking that the child was either mucking up or misbehaving, when what I noticed was actually a lot of the kids' behaviors, the emotional outlets that we were seeing, was a result of them being in overwhelm. It's really fascinating. Like if you think about it, you see a child who has a meltdown. Now, when they get to that meltdown point, they don't just come up with it and just have a big meltdown and then that's it. There's always precursors. There's things that lead up to why that child has a meltdown in the first place. And some of it we can see, and it's quite obvious. One of those things is maybe when a child is really tired and then they have a meltdown. We go, they're having a meltdown because they're tired. But other times we have no idea, and it just seems like they just had this meltdown for no apparent reason, and sometimes we can think, maybe it's for the older kids, maybe it's a bit hormonal, or maybe it's because they're stressed about something or that they've had an argument with somebody. And these things are all really valid points. But when kids hit overwhelm, they basically go into a state that they lose connection with their behavior and their thoughts. Now, sometimes for kids, overwhelm, it can come and go. It might be something where they hit a point of overwhelm throughout their day, they deal with it, and then they come back down to an emotional state, and then they just move on. For other kids, it might be things happen over the course of their day, and then it gradually builds up over the course of the day, and then they hit this point of no return at the end of the school day. And usually what parents report to me for sure is they pick a child up from school. The teachers are reporting that they're just little angels at school. They have this wonderful, well-behaved little student all the time in their class. And the parent says, well, hang on a minute. As soon as they get in the car, they're starting to lash out. They're kicking the back of the chair. They're yelling at me. They're ripping their clothes off. And the rest of the afternoon is just chaos. And this is more common than what you think. And if you're listening to this, you might have even gone, oh my gosh, that happens to me and my kids as well. Now, overwhelm, really, I'm just going to break it down for you in sort of 5 areas that I see overwhelm start to creep in for kids. Okay, and it's things where it could be situational. So something might have happened at school where it was a very sort of specific situation where it made them get to a point where they felt really overwhelmed. And a really easy one to think about is an exam. Or it might be they've had an argument with another student at school, or a teacher wasn't happy with them and they felt really uncomfortable in that space. It could also be environmental. And this environmental overwhelm is probably more common amongst all of these 5. So the more kids are feeling environmentally overwhelmed than any of the other areas. And what I mean by environmental is you think about it, a noisy environment. Schools are extremely chaotic. They're very noisy. There's a lot of things always happening. And for children, and not just children who have additional needs like maybe autism spectrum disorder, or they might have attention deficits, any of the disorders, of course, a lot of times kids can hit overwhelming, but all kids hit a point of overwhelm at some point in their time during the day. It just depends on how well refined their strategies are of how to deal with it, and we will get to that. But you think about environment, if I can tell you a little story about myself. Now, it's pretty commonly known I'm not a fan of shopping. Going to a supermarket is, oh my gosh, like my stress zone. Particularly, these big shopping centres that you go to where there's hundreds of shops around and there's clothes shops and homeware stores and grocery items. They are like my least favourite place to go to anywhere. Now, the reason why, and, let's say years of looking into this as to why I find these environments so stressful, what it's led me to understand is that I actually hit my sensory overload when I am in these locations. What I mean by that, you think of all your senses. You've got your sight, touch, hearing, taste, all the different senses that we have, right? There's many. And what happens when I go into shopping centres is all of these senses feel like they're being bombarded. So they're feeling this overwhelming flush of senses. For me, it's auditory and it's visual. So I see too many things for me to take in. I hear too many things, and all the people moving around and talking, it just really overwhelms me. And what happens as a result of that is some of the symptoms, I guess, or things that I feel is I actually do get sick on my belly when I walk into a shopping centre. I can feel really distracted as well. So like one of my kids might ask me a question and I was like, I don't know, just leave me. I won't be long. Don't just ask me that later. I might give them a response like that. Or I might even find it really hard to make a decision on what I need to buy when I'm there, or what I need to do. Because the thinking behind, this sort of sensory overload, I'm getting hit too much with too many things that are occurring in the environment. And my brain and body just don't know what to do with it. Now, I'm not somebody that has been diagnosed with any type of sensory processing disorder or any type of anxiety. So this for me is a very normal situation. And for many of you listening as well, you might have your own environment that you feel like this, or your own situation where you feel like this. But for me, I know that being in a shopping centre hits my sensory point of threshold. And what I mean by this, let me explain what this means. So when you think about it, all the senses come into, all information comes through all your senses. And what happens is your brain has to decide what is important and what isn't. And for those things that aren't important, then of course the brain just doesn't even register, or it registers it, doesn't really think too much about it, and it moves on. But there are other things as well where your brain goes, actually, do you know what? This is really important for you to pay attention to. You should pay attention to that. And so our brain's always constantly trying to work out what's important information that's coming in and what's not important information coming in. Now, when we're feeling bombarded through our senses, or this sort of sense of sensory overwhelm, what can happen is your brain either starts to process everything. So your brain just goes into this overdrive, or what happens as well is your brain can just withdraw. It can shut down and it can go, do you know what? This is all too much for me to be listening to right now and to be taking in. So I'm just going to shut down, and I can't think of anything else right now. And for me, I'm the second. So when I'm in the shopping center, I go into a shopping center, what happens to my brain is it becomes really what I call hyper aroused. It becomes quite too much information. Yeah, too much information coming in. And then eventually what happens is my brain goes, I can't cope with this anymore, so I need to withdraw. Now, withdrawal for me in a shopping center is things like I have to refer to my list. So my list that I've got, it becomes my little safety net, and I just go to that and I go to the shop that I need to buy the one thing in. You'll very rarely find me wandering around a shopping center because I find that too overwhelming. And it was through my research for the book Switch Off that I came to understand that that was my behavior. That was how I needed to process all this bombardment of sensory information. You know, I always make sure that I've got food in my belly so that it's not sort of another level of sensory processing I have to worry about. I'll make sure I have water with me so my body feels really hydrated. So again, my body or brain doesn't need to worry about that. Now, I know I've gone on probably so long about this shopping center story, but when you look at it as adults, we all have our own situations and environments where we feel very overwhelmed in. For you, it might be at a concert, when we can go back to doing those. It might be when you're in a social situation where there's lots of people. It could be if you're in just a totally new environment. It might be some people feel very overwhelmed when they're in natural environments as well. So I said there were 5 areas where people can often feel really overwhelmed. And this is the situation, like I said before, the environment, so what you're surrounded by. But also people can get very overwhelmed. Kids can get particularly overwhelmed through anticipation. And what I mean by this, and you'll know what I mean, if a child has an exam coming up, or they might have to do public speaking, which we all know is one of the number one stresses and fears for people. If a child has to get up to present to a class, what can cause a child to hit a point of overwhelm is the just very thought that they're going to have to speak to their class. Now, you can already feel that, right? That these little kids are, they've got something coming up, and in anticipation of that, they already are starting to feel overwhelmed. Their brain is starting to feel frazzled. Their body is starting to feel very uncomfortable. Sometimes it's even a sickness in the belly. Sometimes it's a tickling in the back of the throat. There are many, many ways that kids can exhibit when they're hitting a point of no return. So this anticipation of something that's coming up can be really confusing for us adults to really understand, because we don't get it. We can't see for that child what they're anticipating. Why are they feeling? Why are they sitting in their room for? Or as a teacher, it might be, how come that child's not engaging? Why are they sitting at the back of the classroom and I can't get them back into the group? Sometimes that anticipation can cause a really high level of overwhelm for our little kids. The 4th area that can cause a lot of really overwhelm for kids is, of course, social overwhelm. Social overwhelm is something that kids just don't experience. Adults experience this too. But particularly for children have are social beings. They're in a social environment where every day they're grouped with a whole heap of kids who some they might like, some they may not, some they might feel really uncomfortable with, others they might just want to always be around. And this social overwhelm can really have a big ripple effect over the course of a child's day who finds that they are having troubles dealing with senses of overwhelm. And there's playgrounds. I see it all the time as an occupational therapist. Being in the playgrounds in schools, oh my goodness, just can cause children to tip over their point of no return. And that's where we see a lot of the behavioral outlets for kids, a lot of the negative behavior that we see, and it can often be hard for a child to sort of transition back into the classroom because they've just had this whole time of trying to deal with all of this, social overwhelm out in the playground. People are pretty complex beings, working out all of those different social nuances around, well, does that person like me? Don't they like me? How should I be around that person? But I don't want to play that game. Oh, how come they don't want to play my game? All of these things can really create a sense of overwhelm for kids. And I often see, particularly for me, I'm out in playgrounds very often, managing behaviors or trying to support kids who are in this social overwhelm stage, that the transition back into class can sometimes be quite horrific because they've had all of these things that they're trying to deal with in the playground, and they don't have time to transition back into a calm state when they're in the classrooms. So this is through my program, The Inclusive Classroom. When I'm talking to teachers, this is a really strong area that I work with them on, and it's a very common source of frustration for teachers. How do we get children to transition back from the playground into the classroom smoothly? And my first response always is the playground is a very overwhelming environment for many kids. So what we have to do is help them transition calmly back into the classroom. Now, the fifth area is cognitive overwhelm. And what I mean by cognitive overwhelm is for many kids, the amount of thinking they have to do in a day can be exhausting. They get to school, maybe 8:30, they're there until 3 or so, whatever the time is. They're thinking all day. They're constantly thinking, not just through thinking about what's you're being taught, but they're always thinking, like I said, about what should I socially do here? Or they might be thinking about a whole range of different skills that they're learning throughout their school, particularly for the little kids in the first couple of years of primary school. And this cognitive overwhelm, sometimes kids can get to a point at the end of the day where their brain is just tired. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, I feel like this sometimes when I'm working. I know my peak focus time is first thing in the morning. And, come 2 o'clock onwards, I am not at my best. My focus is often super distracted. I'm getting tired. And, we all reach and go and you do behaviors that don't serve us well, like try to have a chocolate, or for some people, they might have that mid-afternoon coffee just to pep them up. And so when we look at our own behaviors with overwhelm, I really encourage you to think about, what do I do when I'm feeling overwhelmed? What are the behaviors I do? Now, you know what I'm like. I really need us adults to think about our behaviors and how they're so similar to what we are wanting from kids, but kids don't yet have those strategies or those appropriate skills on board to know what's right for them to do in those moments when they've hit their point of no return. So when children are hitting overwhelm in whatever state, so when their brain is feeling like it just can't take any more in and their bodies can't take any more in either, what often we'll see is the negative behavior afterwards. Because remember what I said, that overwhelm is really about something having a strong emotional effect on you. So what we often see is this sense of overwhelm for kids. Kids are in this state of overwhelm. And then just after, when they've hit their, what I call their point of no return, so when they just can't take any more, that's when we sort of see this ripple effect of negative behavior. And in a classroom situation, it might be that the child actually leaves the room. They've just had enough, so they withdraw themselves. They walk out of the class because they either need to quieten the noise or the learning is getting too hard for them, and their way of coping with it is actually just getting out of there. And for adults, sometimes we do that at work as well. If things are just getting too much, we just give ourselves a little break And we see this a lot too. It might be through a toilet break. It might be getting up and going and getting a drink. It might be going and getting a coffee. It might be, just going outside to get some fresh air. But what a lot of kids don't have is the ability to do that. So it might be a child is in the middle of a maths lesson. They're feeling like they're hitting their point of no return. They're starting to sense within their body that their heart's racing or that their mind's getting quite full. They're getting distracted. They've got butterflies in their tummy. And they might go up to the teacher and say, do you mind if I go and get a drink, please? Or, Miss, can I go to the toilet? Now, for some schools, they'll say, yep, that's fine. And they'll notice that that child might be hitting their point of no return. But for many schools, it might be, no, that we go to the toilet in break times. That's when we go. Recess and lunch is when we go to the toilet, so you need to stay. And then often what will happen is that child, because they haven't been given that opportunity to press pause on their overwhelm, then they'll go and do something behaviourally that's not okay. And this might look like going and sitting under a desk. It might be spinning on a chair, going sitting on the teacher's chair and spinning around, which I've seen many times. It might be going up and annoying one of the other classmates and, poking them. It might be scrunching up a piece of paper and throwing it, or it might just be refusal to do any more work. Now, I often, when I'm in classrooms, I'll see these behaviours and I always ask what has led up to that point. Very rarely do I go, okay, what now? What behavioural interventions do we need to put in place so this child doesn't do this again? Because if we do that, it's not really getting to the point where we're understanding what led to that behaviour in the first place. There is always a lead up to when something happens. So when children are hitting this overwhelm and we're seeing these behaviours sort of on the other end of it, it's first of all about asking ourselves, okay, where could they be feeling overwhelmed right now? Is it something situational? Are they anticipating that they're about to do a speech, so they're getting nervous about it? And I know there's a slight touch around anxiety here, but it's not what I'm speaking about. It's actually this physiological sense of overwhelm, this feeling that my brain is too full, I'm getting super distracted, I'm getting butterflies on the belly, and sometimes it can just be nervousness, but I'm talking about something where children are feeling like they're about to get out of control. And for teachers, what do? You've got a whole classroom of kids that could be all hitting points of overwhelm at different times. And this is definitely one of the areas that I work on in the Inclusive Classroom online program with teachers, is how do you recognize these signs with children, and what are some of those prevention versus cure strategies you can put in the classroom that can, prevent kids from having these meltdowns, if you want to put it that way, or these behavioural outbursts or withdrawal in the first place. And it can be done. It definitely can be done. Now, when we're talking about overwhelm, just think about when a child is in that state of overwhelm, it's really important as us as adults to start to teach them some strategies that they can use, because it's like, we all know what the right thing to do is if we're feeling stressed, but how many of us actually do the right thing? I know I have once or twice come home feeling a little stressed, gone straight to the fridge and gone, I would love a wine right now. My body doesn't need it, but what I'm saying is I want to give myself an opportunity just to press pause on the overwhelm of the day. For some people, we all have so many. For me, sometimes I'll go for a walk, or I'll go for a jog, or I'll go for a swim. I'll do the really great positive things as well. I'll journal, which is one of my favorite, is writing down at the end of the night why I could have felt that way. But let's face it, not all of them are super positive. Sometimes I do really awful things, like I might yell when I shouldn't, or I'll go and have that glass or two of wine, or, however many, to help me with the overwhelm. Sometimes I will go and just lay flat on my bed going, and just feeling that frustration and that overwhelm. Sometimes it might be having a bath. There are a whole lot of strategies we use as an adult to, deal with the overwhelm. So I see it's our responsibility as adults to teach our little people what are the appropriate strategies you can use when you are feeling overwhelmed. Now, it doesn't mean that they're always going to use the right one. It doesn't mean that they're always going to be, opting for the positive one that they need to use. Okay, sometimes they will use it and other times they won't. But if they don't know the strategies in the first place, then what they're going to do is just make it up. They're just going to go, well, I'm feeling overwhelmed right now. The only thing I know how to do is get out of this classroom. I want quiet, so I'm leaving. For other kids, it might be, I really don't know what to do right now. I have no other fallback. So I'm just going to yell and scream at mum. I'm going to tell her how angry I am and I'm going to have a big meltdown because that's all I know how to do. So as adults, when kids are feeling in that state of overwhelm, teaching them strategies, age-appropriate strategies, of course, age-appropriate strategies are super important, will allow them to start to build a toolkit or build a little repertoire of skills that they know that they can fall back on when they're feeling like things are getting too much. And it's also when we're in this space about knowing, well, what are the preferences for my child? Now, if you're a parent listening to this, then you know your child. You are sort of cued into a lot of the things that they do. They might go into their bedroom and close the door and just have some quiet time. Sometimes they might just flop on the lounge and watch TV. They might lash out. But if you're a teacher listening to this, knowing what strategies you can put in place for these kids can just be so powerful, not just for the child that's having difficulties, but for all the students in the class. I'll work with schools around setting up quiet spaces in their classroom so that any child that needs downtime, any child that's feeling overwhelmed can go and use that quiet space whenever they feel like they need it. And I love it. I call it a pressing pause moment where they just get to go quieten the noise that's either happening inside their head, inside their environment, within their body, within the people around them. If they can press pause on all of that noise, what it will do is it'll allow them not to hit their point of no return so quickly. It'll allow them to have little breathing moments throughout their day where if they're feeling overwhelmed, it can take them back to a space of feeling calm. They might start to go through the day. They'll start to feel a little bit more overwhelmed again. They have a strategy to help them press pause. They come back down and they find quiet. And over the course of the day, giving them these opportunities to come back down and press pause, find some calm, will mean that these kids are not operating on this sort of hyper level of operation, that they're not in a state of constant overwhelm. What they're doing is that they're learning to build skills. They're learning to build strategies that'll take them through their entire life so that when they're adults and also feeling this overwhelm, that the strategies that they're using, the behaviors that they're adopting are things that serve them well. They're not things that cause more stress. They're not things that are negative behaviors. What they are, they're really positive things that serve their mental well-being and their physical well-being and their social well-being in a really positive way. So reducing overwhelm for kids, I think as adults, we all experience overwhelm. And it is important for us all to realize that kids, really little kids throughout primary school, even high school, are feeling a constant sense of overwhelm. And how well they can deal with this will really have a strong impact on their experience of school, their experience of being a child. And imagine having kids that have, grow up into these adults that are using really positive self-calming strategies that allow them to deal with the stress and sometimes the extreme overwhelm of life. So if anything resonated for you today, please leave a comment, contact me through any of my socials because I'd love to hear what strategies you might be using with your kids that you know is working really well. For your teachers, I would love to know what are the things that you've implemented in your classroom that have worked, not just for one or two children, but for all kids in the class, because I know that there are many teachers out there doing great work in this space in trying to reduce overwhelm for kids. So thanks so much for joining me on this episode today. And you know where to follow me on all of the socials and where all podcasts are recorded and played. And I love this topic so much. If you think somebody would benefit from listening to this, please share it with them, because what we're doing is we're helping kids really minimize the stress and the overwhelm that they're facing in their lives. And, hopefully us adults, you guys have also listened and got something out of this episode. Thanks for joining me. I'm Angela Lockwood. Thank you for listening to A Kid's Life podcast. To stay up to date with all new episodes, please subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. If you want to know more about the Inclusive Classroom or any of the other programs I provide, please go to angelalockwood.com.au. And until next time, slow down, have fun, and enjoy.